Can you learn leadership? That's the topic of this week's disruptive discussion for board level gain. I'm Jennifer Tarjanyi and I'm going to be hosting today. At the start of this audio, some of the sound is a little bit warped, but stick with us because it's not for long. So we're going to jump right in with the question, can you learn leadership? Yes, no, or it's complicated. So let's start with you, Tim. Can you learn leadership?
Complicated.
I'm just going to go with who's on my screen next. Charlie.
Oh, it's definitely complicated.
Okay, it's definitely that's a lot of words. Carl.
It's complicated.
And Sonia.
Definitely, it's complicated.
But we asked LinkedIn this yesterday morning, and we had 26,000 people had an opinion on this. 79% said yes, 14% said no, and 7% said complicated. But it does seem, based on the comments that we had, that even that 79% that said yes had a broader opinion than that they found it perhaps a little bit complicated too. So I've drawn out some of the main arguments and themed them as best I can. So there seemed to be a big group of people who said no, leadership is an innate quality. People either want to follow you or they don't. You've got the charisma or you don't. One person absolutely brilliantly said, listen, I'm really shit at maths. I will always be shit at maths. There's nothing you can do to make me not shit at maths. So there's that as a possibility. There's a lot of people as well that said experience is a great teacher, or observing other people is a great teacher. And that seemed to fall into two categories. It was either I see somebody who I consider to be a fantastic leader, and I'm going to role model myself on them. That's my North Star. And then there was a lot of people that said, actually, I looked around and I said, I am never going to be like that. I call that the South Star. I call that the opposite. When you look at somebody and say, yeah, I'm never, ever going to lead like you. And then there was a lot of people that said, actually, yes, you can learn leadership, but you can't learn it in the classroom, or at least not in the way that it's being taught in the classroom right now. And my answer to the question would fall somewhere there, that traditional leadership training, traditional soft skills training is woefully inadequate when it comes to teaching people how to lead. And the way that I would always describe this is that there are 3 T's when it comes to wisdom sharing. There's transmission, translation, and transformation. So transmission is what happens when you get on an aeroplane. You sit in your seat. Who misses being on an aeroplane? I miss being on an aeroplane so much. You sit in your seat, somebody gives you the safety briefing, and hopefully for all concerned, you understand it. And that is as far as leadership training goes for the most part. There's then translation, which is if you go to really good leadership training, that's what will probably happen. Somebody will tell you a story that inspires you. It might be a sporting metaphor. There might be something that makes it real to your own life. They might share something from their life and you have an aha moment, you have a realization. But with neither of those, nothing really happens. And you need to get to a stage where, to some extent, whether leaders are made or born, or whether, well, actually, let's assume that they are made to whatever extent, you need to get to a point where some kind of transformation happens. So that is my argument. And I wonder who here on the stage has an argument that either counters that or perhaps supports that. And I will leave it up to the other disruptors to jump in and share your view.
I mean, as somebody who was, I don't know if I consider myself a leader, but obviously I run a business and I have a team and I would like to think I lead them. I think it's something I pay way more attention to now in terms of how other people lead and qualities that I've seen in other people that I either think are great or I definitely would never want to behave in that manner. And I think that definitely shapes me, but also part of it is just my personality and who I am. So a comment in our office today was, I've never worked in an office where, we always have food, you're always bringing something in, you're always doing something for the team. But that is part of who I am. That is me as a person. But then there are other qualities that I've seen in leaders where communication's been really poor. Things haven't been communicated in the right way or at all to their teams. And I take things like that on board as well. And I really think I never want to be that person. I never want to do that. So I think for me, it is a bit of both. It is part of it is who I am, and part of it is who I look at and I think I want to be more like that, and I definitely don't want to be like X, Y, and Z.
So you're really falling into the camp of this is more like a lived experience than something that you learn in the classroom. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely. For me, it's not something I could go on a course and learn. It's something that I've had to, as I grow, as I've grown in confidence, as I've grown as a person, my life experiences have taught me valuable lessons, and that has really shaped how I feel I am as, like I said, I don't see myself as a leader, but yes, as a leader.
I really like that. I would like to bring Tim into this because I know that Tim's got two very strong, almost conflicting viewpoints on this. So Tim is a big fan of conversations around the skills gap and the way that we learn to be leaders almost academically, but then equally his lived experience that we've spoken about might suggest something different. So Tim, can I bring you in here?
Thanks, Jen. Yeah, it's almost where to start. I think learning from experience, yours or anybody's else, is absolutely vital. And you have to be aware of self to really give any sort of leadership situation it's the respect it deserves, or the people the chance for them to deliver under your guidance. As part of one of the threads yesterday was interesting when we managed to get 2 SAS veterans in. One was a captain and one had been a corporal. And at different times within the SAS, they told us that rank has not got everything to do with the leading. At times, the corporals were in charge. And I think one of the responsibilities of a leader in an organization is to understand when there is a person with specific skills or connections who is better to serve the needs of the team and deliver the goals. From personal experience, I think you have to be seen to be doing the right thing. You have to be the change, but you have to help everyone live the change. It's a complicated question that's got so many different angles, as we said, and I've got some views to jump in back later on, but maybe we could ask Carl, because one of the reasons we asked Carl to be here, Jen, because Carl gave us one of the worst pieces of news that you and I had ever received up until that point, but he did it in such a way that you sort of fell in love with the guy, and you wanted his advice in these areas. So Carl, can I ask you please next?
So something that Sonia touched on there, being who you are, and for me, leadership in terms of being who you are is about the values you hold, and I think you can grow and evolve your values as you go through your career. So for me, I always had 2 things in my mind as a leader. One which was about discernment, and the other was about blueprint. So discernment for me was very much about, are you showing respect for yourself? Are you showing respect for the other person? Are you showing respect for whatever you represent, whether that's a business unit, a client, or whatever the circumstances are? And then the blueprint part was very much about, are you just being the best version of you can be? And I know that I failed in that so many times, and I learned from every single failure. When I didn't do that, when I wasn't listening well enough, when I wasn't being self-aware enough, when I wasn't being curious enough about how other people would react to whatever I was saying, you just really picking up on that. So in circumstances where you are under pressure as a leader, and believe me, in that particular circumstance, I felt as though I was under pressure, and I was both down, across, sideways, talking to 178 people. It was about just holding, what do you hold on to in those situations is, for me, what your values are, and making sure you are just being really mindful about the responsibility. You have a fantastic opportunity in leadership. It's a complete gift, but you also have a massive responsibility as well.
Carl, would you be willing for me to share that story as I remember it and the impact that it had on me? Will you be terribly embarrassed if I do that?
You can share it, but I would be terribly embarrassed.
You can hide your face, and also feel free, because this was some years ago, and memory has a way of changing things. So please jump in if you remember this differently. But I think for the audience, this was an incredibly powerful moment that really changed the way that I understand leadership, and definitely impacts the way in which I work with leaders now. So to give some context, we had turned up to an away day. We were part of a large organisation. We turned up to an incredibly well-crafted and probably very expensive away day. And at the start of the day, Carl stood up on the stage and said words to the effect of, I don't really know what to say to you. I haven't really slept. At about 9 o'clock last night, I found out that a very big chunk of you were going to be made redundant. Now, as it turns out, it wasn't Tim and I this time. We were in the next round of redundancies. But instead of standing up and also really honoured, I remember this bit as well, that Carl said that there's a lot of people that have put a lot of work into making this an incredible day, and I have to deliver this news, and I've been there, and being made redundant is hard. And instead of going ahead with all this expensive, well-crafted plan that we have for you, which is what we would normally do in the corporate world, we instead want to give you the time and space to have the conversations you need to have. Go away, speak to each other, come up with the questions you have, come back into the room, ask me anything, and then go off and do what you need to do. Go to the pub if you need to. That's fine with me. It's the second time I've talked about going to the pub. I think lockdown is getting to me. But all these years later, we remembered this conversation, Tim and I. Actually, there was an in-between conversation at the Christmas party. Drunk Jen may have told Carl just quite how impactful that was and regretted it the next day. But all these years later, that still has a massive impact on me, and was the reason that we wanted Carl to come in as somebody who role models leadership in a way that's actually really aligned to the conversation that we had on LinkedIn yesterday. Tim, do you want to add anything to that experience?
As shit sandwiches go, it was a really quite acceptably presented one, because it was bad news. Carl was honest. He was open and he was straight with us all. There was no messing around. We knew that he didn't like it. You could see it in the man's face. And as a senior leader in a very prestigious organisation, he did himself and the situation, to the best of his ability, did himself proud in that respect, because you've got to be seen to be doing the right things, and he did, and all credit to him. So as much as what he's done for us all, no, it's very difficult, and Carl's a great example of what went well there.
I'd like to bring Charlie in here. So, strictly speaking, Charlie is here because she is an expert in the apprenticeship scheme, and she's a board member. But I know a little bit more about Charlie than most people, and she's panicking now. She's going to say, what are you going to say? But Charlie is the epitome of a servant leader in my book. And so I'd like to hear your perspective on it, please.
Thanks, Jen. Yeah, thanks for landing me in that conversation. Servant leadership, weirdly enough, is it's a fairly new phrase for me to come across, and it is, and the reason I think that is because I've naturally lived those values. It's not I went to a training course, somebody spoke to me about servant leadership, and I went, oh yeah, I'm going to do it like that. It was exactly what Carl was saying about, I just was really true to my values. And I feel that as a leader, it's my privilege and responsibility to create the space for other people to excel. I had a CEO, line manager, once upon a time, that always said to me, being successful in leadership is achieving things through other people. And it's about creating that space and really understanding what people need on a very human and real level. And that sounds exactly like your experience there, Jan and Tim. You experienced a real human connection. And that's what great leadership is about. It's about really connecting with people. And as Sonia said, communication, that's what's core, is communicating with people and leading that direction. I will take this opportunity maybe to steer this conversation a little bit. Because when I was thinking about this topic and what leadership means to me and what my experience have been, I've been in the education and training sector for a very long time. And one of the things I found frustrating, and I have talked to you, Jen, about this many times, and the difficulty of being a servant leader in that space sometimes, because we're there to train and progress the next, people. We're there to make other people better. But as a sector, and Carl, I'll be really interested in your view in this, we don't do enough to lead our sector of training and education in the right direction. As leaders, our role is to be brave. It's to make decisions, to drive that direction and to influence other people to take action and take that route with us. But in my sector, well, all of our sector actually, when we talk about it, those changes aren't happening. There's, even before the pandemic, the ed tech or technology and education was progressing at a really rapid pace. And I am generalizing here, but the adoption of that has been very slow. And that's been around the real hesitation of leadership to lead a change and to do something exciting and innovative with learning. Because, there are lots of leaders out there who are too scared to be brave, to lead a change. And, I'm going to be totally honest here, I'm not ashamed. And that's the reason why I'm working with Jen. So anyone who doesn't know, Jen is coaching me in my leadership role. And that is to help me to navigate that space and to live my values of bravery and leading a change and inciting riot, if you like, or being disruptive. Because that's what I think it needs. And sometimes you, even as a leader, you need that coaching, that experience, that learning to make you better, to do the things that you need to do as a leader.
I love that, Charlie. Can I just say what a pleasure you are to coach as well? I know I said it one-on-one, but since you've outed us, I'm going to out us further. You're an absolute delight, and absolutely brilliant. So this brought up something for me, which is something I'm especially passionate about, and anybody that's ever had a conversation with me about unlearning or followed my LinkedIn will have heard this before, but this is my personal rallying cry to the whole thing. So you said some things here about we're here to make people better, but these changes aren't happening, and there's a hesitation to be innovative, and there's a hesitation to change. And my view on this would be that this is because of the barriers and the attachments that we have to the status quo and to our sense of comfort. So for anybody that hasn't heard me say this before, this is my ultimate belief on how leadership development works. There was a poet called Rumi, 13th century, said, "Your task is not to seek for love, but merely to seek and find all the barriers you have built within yourself against it." I'm going to say it again because I really like it. Your task is not to seek for love, but merely to seek and find all the barriers you have built within yourself against it. So if we take the word love out and we replace it with leadership, with making a change, with innovation, with what other words have we used today? We've talked about being a values-driven leader. We've talked about being compassionate. We've talked about open communication. We've talked about authenticity. If we take those words out and drop them in the place of love, that's what I think we need to do in order to make great leaders. We need to seek and find all the personal barriers and the attachments that we have to our comfort and to the status quo, to our status, to our safety, to our reputation, to belonging, to our bonuses, because those are the barriers that get in the way of this kind of leadership which we're all talking about. And yes, we've all used different words, but fundamentally we're all talking about the same thing, and none of it seems to stem from academia, and none of it seems to be anything like the status quo that we are experiencing.
So Jen, can I jump in? There's some really good answers, really interesting ideas, right? But I've got a concern. Well, I said it's complicated, it's not easy, clearly. But my concern with the leadership idea and whether it can be learned is it being learned, okay? Leadership and turnover intention of employees are linked. I've gone through the library and picked out some interesting articles. So Riaz in 2019 linked turnover intention and leadership ability. The engagement rate of an organisation, if measured, is a reflection of leadership. 83% of UK employees, however, are not engaged. Does that mean that 83% of our leaders are not engaging and good at leadership? Question, have they learnt leadership? Have their training partners taught them the wrong things? When we went back to what Simon Mann was talking about yesterday, leadership's context specific, possibly sector specific, time specific. And disruptive leadership's required in challenging times. Now, Jen and Carl specifically, a specialist with large organisations. One of my major interests and passions is small organisations. So some of these statistics may lend themselves to one side or the other, but please chime in and contradict and fight where you can. But 80% of our SMEs die within 4 years. Can the leadership be any good in those organisations? Now, why are we allowing this status quo to remain? Is the question to all of you.
I was definitely going to say that as well. I think there is definitely a link between retention and good leadership in organisations, definitely smaller organisations, family-run organisations, organisations perhaps that have started with somebody who's got a passion for doing something, and then their business has grown and grown, and they now find themselves as leaders. I think we tend to see it from two different aspects. So either you've got somebody who's been there for some time, who's very stuck in their ways, who doesn't want to kind of change their leadership style, and perhaps as their organisation has grown and new faces have joined, they've kind of thought, this isn't for me, this isn't the organisation that I want to be in. And I think that's where retention is linked. But then sometimes you have somebody who might be a fantastic leader and for whatever reason or other leaves the organisation. Sometimes you see a lot of people leave at the same time or just a short while after. I know I'm seeing it at the moment, actually not with any of our clients, but in a school environment by one of their, my children. One of the leaders in that school has left, and it's had an impact on the rest of the teaching staff. And it was because either they consider this person to have been a great leader, and they don't feel that things are the same now, that they haven't got that leadership at that level. So I think there is a lot of that. I think sometimes we have frustrations in what we do when we're working with clients, because we can see either there's some great leadership that isn't being kind of, used to its full potential, or actually really toxic people, really kind of negative traits. And people just kind of feel like, I'm not going to get anywhere here. I'm not being listened to. My thoughts aren't being taken on board. Charlie mentioned about really getting the best out of individuals, helping them grow, helping them on their journey. And when people feel that they can't relate to that, and that's what they've got in terms of their leadership, then definitely you see that correlation with the retention rates and people wanting to leave that organisation.
We've still got this four-year average lifespan and 83% disengaged. At what point do you think, or what else do we as advisors these days have to do to get to a critical point where we can increase employee engagement because of the direct links with productivity and profit? At what point are the leaders going to say, I know I don't know something? These economically valuable skills that we talked about last year, specifically management, human resource, sales and business operations skills, are the skills that they need to learn. When will they? Will they? Now, that's from the smaller business perspective. But Carl, you've got a great career. You're having a great career with large organisations, and you have seen the big firms operate a successful promotion campaign and leadership development program. Can you give us some wisdom or some experience so that we can, share it with our friends?
Yeah, I mean, I was reflecting on what Charlie was saying actually, and so some of the, you know, in a large environment, I would sit there and say the politics are generally more nuanced than a smaller business, and sometimes everything you do in a leadership capacity is constrained by policy, and if not to some extent by what are seen as legitimate HR concerns. So the inability to have straightforward and sensible conversations with people in a large organisation, certainly where everything's very carefully scripted, the business case is very rounded, as opposed to really trying to say it as it is, and you know, so that's the one thing, and I also had the good fortune to work with well, hundreds, if not thousands, of small businesses who were growing and going through growing pains, and watching the challenge of leadership within that is one where I'm not sure how much value is, and maybe for very good reasons, is given to saying we need a well-trained, able workforce. So there's no reason, as Charlie knows, and knows more than I do, you know, there is no reason why any training in the world cannot be undertaken at the moment using funding. Even for small businesses, it's a relatively small contribution they would need to make. But I see a reluctance in some businesses to really invest in their people to do that, because they can't quite see how it equates to what the P&L may look like in the future. And I think that applies equally in large businesses as well, where there is a lack of connection between what does it mean to really empower our people to do what they need to be and what they want to be able to do, and to really deliver outstanding results. So I, you know, I think actually you see the same set of circumstances in both. They just manifest themselves in very different ways.
Can I jump in here? Because this is something, what you're talking about here, Carl, I think is behavioural muscle memory, and is attachment to, this has worked for me and it has got me here, and I'll be buggered if I'm going to let go of it. So I see this, my big client at the moment that I do, the majority of my work comes from 120,000 staff globally. I work with the top 350 leaders. So we're talking, you know, quite a senior level, and people that have got to a certain place by doing a certain thing, doing a thing that they've always done. And it's the attachment to those strategies, the safety that sits within that politics, that stops people from being able to say, actually, we can do something differently here. You know, use this word legitimate, Carl. This is legitimate HR reason. I would say in most cases, that's self-preservation. That is, how can we avoid getting sued? How can we keep our jobs and let everybody else do our thing? I think when we have an attachment to safety and comfort, so whether it is status or belonging or bonus or whatever it is, we lose an opportunity for our humanity. And it's our humanity that kept coming up again and again in the survey yesterday and today, that people were saying, actually, I just want someone who empathizes, who gets it, who's willing to be like leading the charge, stick their head above the parapet, to be the servant leader that Charlie and I talk about. You know, we need somebody that's willing to do that. And the barrier, to go back to our friend Rumi, the poet, is safety and comfort and the status quo that we call legitimate, that we call business-like, that we call professional. And I would like to just throw into the mix that professional is horseshit, and I'm over it.
Just want to say that I am going to second that, and it is something that I personally have really struggled with, you know, that line of what is considered to be professional and actually what I can see needs to be done, and doing that in the right way. And that is that constant battle as a leader, you know, am I doing this for myself, or am I doing this because it's the right thing to do for everybody else? And that's the battle that we go through as leaders. And you know, leadership is experiential. It's, as leaders, we have to learn as we go. We have to take stock of the situation, the environment that we're working in. If the pandemic has taught us nothing, it's that we have to say, do you know what, this is unprecedented, we've never been here before, so I'm going to understand and take real interest of my people and the environment and what is happening, and react in the way that I feel is better for everybody. And we have to constantly hone our ability to assess the situation, engage with people, because the way that you engage needs to change depending on who they are and what environment you're in. And, again, incite that action. And it doesn't matter how many role plays you do in a classroom or in your leadership training. It's what happens in the real world, and it's the falling over and getting up again and trying again and being a human and being able to show your vulnerability to people, because that is ultimately what people want to see. They want to know that you are a human and you connect with them on that level.
So are you saying that people haven't learned or mastered those skills by the time they enter the labour market?
I would say, yeah. I would say that's the moment they get robbed of them. Even if they have them when they enter the labour market, it's they gradually drop a piece here, drop a piece there, have another chunk taken away, ripped from them. That's when these are the ways in which we survive. We drop a little bit of humanity here, we drop a little bit of empathy there. We switch ourselves off to the experience of other people. We stop feeling our feelings in the interest of getting ahead, of surviving, of being paid. And I think for me, it's an undoing. The leaders that I work with the most, these really senior people that have been on every leadership training that there is, they've seen every consultant that there is, they've seen every leadership model that there is. All they want is for someone to say, you don't have to do that anymore. You can feel again. I know I've said this to you privately, Tim, but the best thing a leader ever said to me was, you've taught me to be a human again. And I think that's what we need to get to.
I think it goes back to kind of what I say I always hate, which is generic HR and off-the-shelf policies and, we're in a different sector and we run our business like this, but you know what, our HR policies and procedures, they're just going to be the same because we've signed up for this 5-year contract and that just ticks the box. When we get inspected because of the industry that we operate in, yeah, we can say we've got a disciplinary procedure, yeah, we can say we've got a capability procedure. But actually, a lot of this is about the culture of a business. And that's what we really try and drive at Nectar. Like, what is your culture? What's important to you? What is not important to you? What do you want from your employees? And we kind of like turn it on its head a little bit. And then that's how you drive how you protect your business from an employment legislation perspective, but also how you engage and motivate your staff. You're seeing more and more businesses that are adopting things that aren't statutory processes anymore because they want to be different. They want to be the employer of choice. We saw legislation that was passed in New Zealand around miscarriages, and then we've got organisations in this country, smaller organisations, not even the big large firms, saying we're going to do that. We've got people saying we're going to give staff every payday off. You've got your birthday off. We do that here. You have your birthday off as annual leave. They're only small gestures. I know they don't go a huge way, but they are kind of saying you are important. We value you as a person. And human resources, personnel, whatever you want to call it, it's about people. You can't just boil it down to a generic policy, a generic X, Y, and Z. You've got to build it around what do you stand for? And it links into leadership. I like to do charitable work. The team here, we give our time to charitable work. It doesn't have to be HR advice. They can paint a bench. They could go to a cat shelter. That's up to them. But I want them to feel engaged. I want them to feel like we actually make a difference in whatever we're doing in our lives, in our working lives. We spend so much time doing it. You spend so much time at work. You've got to be engaged. You've got to be motivated. And I don't think that people always realise the impact that you can have if you've got those processes right.
I'm going to go around the group again. This time it's not one word, but it's one final argument. What do you think the answer to the problem is? So I think we've established that it's complicated. It's like a Facebook relationship. It's complicated. But what is the answer? So I'm going to, as you were on a roll, Sonia, I'm going to go to you first. what is the answer from your personal point of view, but also, you know, is there an offer that Nectar can give that will help to address this particular, it's complicated problem?
There's so many pieces of the pie. I wouldn't say that there's just one thing. Yes, we go in there, we do free HR health checks, we put reports together and we feed them back to anybody who wants it. You don't have to work with us. You don't have to use our services. We do that because we're passionate about, you know, somebody walks away and they kind of, at least they know what they need to do. And that's not just about leadership, that is about generally how much they value their people in the organisation and how much they value getting it right. So for me, it's a whole life cycle approach, really.
Love that whole life cycle. I'm taking that away as a soundbite. Tim, what's your final answer, and what are you going to do to change this problem?
Carry on the campaign. I'm going to learn all of these new words as part of this PhD, understand how it fits together, and I would like to be lobbying government and policy advisors about the importance of these topics, because there is so much research. Ignoring the answers and ignoring data, it's not bright. It's definitely not clever. And I know we've all got a freebie, so as listeners, please have a look through our websites and have a look through our bios. But I think for me, the only thing to remember is the role of a leader. And then we can work out to teach it and for them to learn it. And they've got to be a strategic thinker, a visionary, and a motivator.
Very interesting. I feel like the next topic might be, what is a leader anyway?
I suppose for me, it's, you know, my bread and butter is leadership training. So I do feel that you can learn the theory and the knowledge to be a good leader, but ultimately those skills and behaviours are learned in practice. And it's about taking the time as a leader to figure out what your values are and then being brave and sticking to them and just being a human being.
Yeah, and there's always the danger of almost being last, that everyone's covered everything else. I think for me, it's about taking time to know yourself, and I really loved your quote, Jen, in terms of how you put that. Understanding your individual strengths and weaknesses. Ensure you understand your organisation's culture and value, and even if it's not your organisation, or you're not the business owner, then your interpretation of what great looks like within the environment that you're working in. Know your people, take time to understand your people, and really understand what they need to give their best and help them succeed. And then in your training needs, and I certainly know Charlie does this, so we try to as well, really making sure that feels like an individual experience, because all learning is an individual experience and people will learn in different ways and so on and so forth. But don't sheep-dip people through training. Make sure that you really bespoke that for them and take the time to curate that leadership training so they feel it has value and it reinforces what you're saying to them as a leader. And even if it creates dissonance, that dissonance, as long as it's open and shared, can be incredibly positive in terms of shaping your organisation of the future.
Wow, there's nothing much more for me to add. My answer to the question is, can you learn leadership? No, I think you need to unlearn it, is my response. Your task is not to seek to be a leader, but merely to seek and find. You know how this one ends. Thank you for being here. We have been Disruptive Discussions for Board Level Game. We're here every week at this time on Tuesday with varying topics that relate to your people, to your organisation, no matter how large, small, young, old you are. We've got an opinion on it.